they spoiled her so much. Then when they realized how bad she was, then they wanted to blame everybody else. And so they have plenty to blame for that. And one other thing, June leaned up a while ago when I sat back down. She said, I thought there for a minute you were losing control. Good. I didn't want to be in control. I didn't want it. I don't want to be in control. I was sitting in that line thinking Martin singing, somebody's praying. Somebody prayed for this morning, for our service this morning. We'll meet again next week. You can go ahead and pray this week for next Sunday. And so go ahead and keep it up. All right, John chapter 20. I'm going to assume by now you found your place. Apologize for that not being on the bulletin this morning, but Tommy and Carol are going to Gideon's convention, and she had to get the bulletin done before I was ready. And so, John chapter 20. We started last week on a series that, for a lack of anything better to call it, I'm calling them Jerusalem 5-0. And again, I got to look for the Hawaii 5-0 Hawaii 5-0 theme music. I'm going to start playing that as I come to the pulpit. And so, but there were 40 days between the resurrection of Christ and the ascension, and then 10 more before Pentecost. And some of the events that took place during that time, I think, are some of the most critical, crucial stories in the Word of God. There are about, some of them overlap a little bit, but between the Gospels and the first chapter of Acts, there are 10 different passages, sections that deal and share with us information about that time period. If you do the math, that doesn't work out to a lot of information over a 40-day period to only have 10 days, or really if you take out the one that has to do with the ascension, there are only 8. Because the last section of Luke and the first of Acts talk about the ascension. So other than that, there are 8 stories or 8 accounts, and again, a couple of those are the same story, just told by somebody different. So there's not a lot of information in the Bible about these 40 days. But one of the things that I have discovered as I've looked at them is how revealing they are about the very nature of Christ. I think in that time, in these stories, we learn as much about Christ as probably as we can take in, to be honest with you. And by doing that, then it tells us a lot about who we are to be and who we should be. I mentioned last week as we started this, one of the important things I think about this would be revealed to us in how we are about last words, how we are about someone's final words. Very seldom do I participate in a funeral where I don't hear someone say, I remember the last time I spoke to so-and-so, whether it was on the phone or in person, and the last thing they said to me before we hung up or before we walked away, or they remember those last words. And last words are always important. Certainly we can learn a lot by looking at the last words of Christ. In fact, several years ago, leading up to Easter, I preached on those last sayings of Christ. But if the last words of someone, Christ, anyone else, would be important, let's think about this for a moment. How much more important would be the next words? If the last words are important, how important are those words that come up on the Monday after resurrection? And not to say that any of the words of Christ are not important, but to think about the value of the words of Christ during those 40 days. Because, again, let's be honest, if I was Christ, if you were Christ, in all likelihood, the moment after resurrection, I would have went back to the Father. I'm done with y'all. In fact, let's be honest, if the truth was known, I would be like, if I was Christ, I would be like the old hymn. Some of you may remember this. When you got ready to crucify me, how many of you remember the old hymn that says, He could have called 10,000 angels? I promise you, 10,000 wouldn't have knocked a dent in it. I would have sicked all of heaven on you if you tried to drive nails in my hands and feet. And so these words of Christ after the resurrection
are of critical importance. And the passage that we have here this morning in the Gospel of John, 20th chapter, 19th verse, these 5 verses reveal to us, and it's a little bit hard as you look through the Scripture and through the Gospel to put an exact timeline on when all these things took place, on when these appearances and when these words were spoken. Pretty sure, I think it's safe to say that his words to Mary outside of the tomb on that first Easter morning were first. I think it's fairly safe to say that his appearance to the disciples on the Emmaus Road were probably second. And I'm fairly comfortable in saying that this would have been the third appearance. But I'm not sure about that. But what we're relatively sure of, based on the Word of God, is this is his first appearance to his disciples as a group. Now, they're not all together. Remember, Judas has by now went out and hung himself after betraying Christ. And Thomas is not. We'll learn later in John chapter 20 that Thomas isn't with them at this point in these verses. As far as we know, all the other disciples were together at this time. That we have 10 disciples there, and Christ appears in their midst. Now, I don't know, but I've shared with you before, I have a sometimes too good for my own good imagination. And I can only imagine the conversation. I can only imagine the emotion in this room as these 10 disciples have now gathered. They are gathered together and they're hashing over what they know, what they think, what they believe has happened in the last 3, 4, 5 days. Just a few days ago, they're out in the garden with Christ, and the soldiers come along and arrest him. Peter takes the sword and lops off the ear of the soldier. In a few moments, Peter denies Christ outside of the courtroom, and then they begin to crucify him. And from all evidence, all of them, again, Judas has gone to hang himself. 10 of them have scattered like cockroaches in the light, and John is standing by the cross with Mary, the mother of Jesus. And for whatever reason, they've come back together now. And I don't know what I would pay to be able to get on a time machine. If there are a lot of places in history, I would like to get on the time machine and dial it up and go back. I don't want to be part. I just want to watch. And this is one of them. I would like to get in the time machine and travel back and just, as they say, be a fly on the wall in that room that day as those 10 are gathered, and they're standing there talking about everything that they have seen, heard, think, believe, know, and their emotions are all over the place. They're sad, they're scared, they're mad. They've witnessed Christ be crucified. They've went and found an empty tomb. They've had people say, "Well, we saw him; he's alive," but so they haven't, and they don't know. For all they know, at that very moment, the Roman soldiers are gathering up and getting the names of his closest associates, and they're fixing to come arrest them and crucify them, and they're debating, should we scatter out all over the countryside? Should we run? Should we preach? Should we, what do we do? And their emotions, they are everywhere. I can imagine that there are probably 1 or 2 of them, just because of the way people are and the way personalities are. There are probably 1 or 2 of them that are sitting in that room like this. They don't have anything to say. I mean, they are just totally, they're out of it. I mean, they are, their mind is blown. They're toast. I mean, and it's about to get way worse. And they're sitting there and they're trying to process everything. And I'm sure, just based on what we know about him, that Peter's in there. He's the ringleader. I mean, in fact, we read at one point Peter just jumps up and says, "I'm going fishing." And so I'm sure Peter was the ringleader, and John's probably over in the corner because he's the young one, so he really doesn't say a lot. But John's real thoughtful. thoughtful. He's giving us some debate, and he's thinking, and we've got several of the disciples. We really don't know anything much other than their name, but I'm certain there are one or two of them that are just, that some of them can't shut up and some of them can't speak. I mean, it's got to be a wild room. You can imagine just, you get 10 people in a room, and you can imagine the personalities and everything that would be going off. And all of a sudden, as they sit there, I can only imagine, again, what that would be like. They're sitting there, and again, some of them, some people are when they're nervous. They can't, some of them, they're shutting up, and some of them are wishing everybody else would shut up. And, it's a wild room. And all of a sudden, Jesus is standing there. And I can only, again, think about what that, there were probably some of them there going, that were, I can, just imagine someone saying, well, I don't know what we're going to. You can imagine the looks on some of them's face. And I told them, this is one of the first service, the closest I can come, I think about that, how some of them must have been thinking. Some of you, I learned a great lesson for my ministry from Diane and Tommy's father years ago over at Presbyterian Hospital. Some of you remember Juanita Russ, and bless her heart, Juanita, they hauled her medical records around. When they needed to move her medical records, they called Mayflower. I mean, this dear lady, dear saint, never complained, but if it could be done to the human body, somebody had poked, she had every test, everything. And I never will forget, after one of her procedures, something had been done. She was laying in her hospital bed. She wasn't saying anything, but she just kept staring right up, like right there where the crown molding is, right where the ceiling, and she just kept staring. Diane's daddy was standing there. David looks at her and says, Juanita, what you looking at? And Juanita says, I'm just watching them men work. By the way, there wasn't no men working. There wasn't even no work. I mean, it was just a wall. And David says, me too, Juanita. I was wondering what they were up to. And Juanita goes, I'm glad somebody else saw them. I thought I was crazy, and lay down and went to sleep. And so from then on, if somebody sees something, I don't argue with them. I just, I leave them alone. I learned a great lesson from David. If you see it, unless it's dangerous, I see it. I mean, I just don't argue with him. But I can imagine in that room, some of those disciples were like, you see what I see? Look over there. They were. They had that ventriloquist thing going on. They're trying not to move their lips. Hey, Matthew, you see that? I'm glad you see it. I thought I was crazy. Well, doesn't that look a lot like Jesus? I just can't imagine what was going on in that room. And as they all, you can imagine how that. There's 10 people in a room. They're all babbling back and forth, and Jesus appears, and I'm sure some of them saw before others, and so it kind of gradually got quieter, and he kind of gradually got their attention until eventually all 10 of them were like, finally he had the undivided attention of the entire room. You know how it is, like before church starts, when I come up here and y'all ignore me. But kind of gradually y'all realize that maybe it's time to start church, and the room kind of gets quiet for the most part. And so you can imagine that room. And as they stand there, like there wasn't enough emotion going on in these men's life. Now they're seeing things. Or they think they're seeing things. The Bible tells us, it says they don't know if they're seeing a vision or they're seeing a ghost. And in this story, Jesus, by just a few words and just a few actions, I think tells us just about everything we need to know about Him, about who He is, and about His care and His compassion for His people. Notice with me, if you will, His presence. He just appears in the room. Now, I'm sure as you think about this story, you know the story, you know what's happened. Peter has denied Jesus. Again, 10 have scattered like cockroaches when the lights come on. I mean, they're gone. They're out there. And I'm certain that when word got back to Peter that Christ might be alive. How many of you ever had this happen to you? And I realize some of you are just so squeaky clean, you probably never heard this. How many of you ever heard this statement? Just wait till your daddy gets home. Oh, I got volunteers. I got people raising him. Must have been bad. You know what Peter was thinking from the moment he heard that Jesus might be alive? There was part of him thinking, I can't wait to see him. But there was part of him thinking, oh no, this is going to be ugly. This is going to be bad. Because he's going to walk in and he is going to just tear me up for denying him. I mean, he is just going to wear me out. Some of the other ones were thinking, let's see, he knows everything. How can I tell him? I really wasn't running away. I was just going to check on my mama. So, they're thinking, how in the world am I going to face him for the first time? You can imagine, like they weren't tore up enough. All of a sudden they look up and there he is. What will be his first words to his disciples gathered? Peter, listen, I'm going to tell you I'm Jesus. I'm breaking Peter in half. I mean, Peter, I told you. Listen, I know me. I'm sorry. I know me. I'm tearing Peter up. Those that ran and scattered, you bunch of chickens, you cowards. Here I am getting crucified, and you're scattering like cockroaches. That's me. But the first words out of Jesus' mouth, peace be unto you. Wow. See, I've noticed something as I've studied these passages. You remember what he said to the two on the road to Emmaus last week? He walks up behind them when he hears their call, and what does he say to them? Why are you so sad? He walks up to his disciples, and he says, peace be unto you. You know what the third thing he's going to say? He's going to make another statement in a minute we're going to look at. And then you know what the third thing he says to the disciples again? Peace be unto you. I don't know about you, but as I thought about that simple statement, that is, to me, as I thought about that, that sums up everything that Christ is. That sums up everything He's about. That sums up who He is, what He wants. That sums up His desire for His relationship with you and I, is as He looked at these men who He had every right to walk into that room and just go to, like He was at the temple, running the money changer. He had every right to wear these men out. And He walks in and He says, peace. Peace. Let me ask you a question. How many of us deserve Christ walking in the room and wearing us out? I noticed nobody raised their hands. Let me solve you the trouble. It would be much easier for me to say, who doesn't? We all. The Bible tells us